Hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton Knave. We're doing Zappa In New York this week, the story of which is quite convoluted, so bear with me. There are also conflicting accounts of the story of it, so this is my interpretation of it given the evidence available. Following the recording of Zoot Laws, Zappa was touring, actually with a brilliant band, a small band, and it does appear he wasn't making enough money. At one point there were actually a quartet of Patrick O'Hearn on bass, Terry Bozzio on drums, and the great Eddie Jobson on keyboards, and Zappa. Apparently Zappa was pretty down at the time. He wasn't making enough money. He felt the record company weren't pushing things properly. Terry Bozzio did actually mention that at one point he wasn't able to pay them. He actually wasn't able to pay his own musicians. It was getting pretty tough, and he was finding that the record company weren't supporting him. They weren't really promoting his products. It was as if they wanted to get rid of him. Supposedly he wanted to do lots of different projects, so he wanted to do a 10 record set. But the record company insisted if he did a 10 record set, that will count as one album. So he's very unhappy with them. But when Zoot Laws came out, it actually sold a fair amount, but supposedly nothing to do with Warner Brothers, who, he would go into a particular town to play and there'd be no advertising for the concerts at all. It was a frightening situation. So he decided it's time to leave Warner Brothers. This is ridiculous. He must have made enough money from Zoot Laws, I'd assume, to get together a bigger band for the New Look Palladium gigs in December of '76. These are the Saturday Night Live performances, because a few days before he'd actually played on Saturday Night Live where they played, I think they played the Purple Lagoon, which I'll talk about in a bit. They played Peaches on Regalia, which I think is Peaches 2, actually, which has lots of lead guitar over the top of it, and I'm the Slime. So this is the concerts of that, and they actually got the TV announcer guy to come on stage and announce some of the songs on this, so that's great listening. What he did then was, as he decided to get rid of Warner Brothers, he went into Warner Brothers offices and dumped 4 albums on them, because he had this incredible backlog of material. It's very strange that the material on Zoot Laws, such that it is, I don't think it's a great album. He had some fantastic stuff in the vaults. I don't understand how he could have gone from the material he was playing a couple of months before this, which was essentially Zoot Laws live, plus a couple of Flo and Eddie songs, to the amazing music he had on here, and also the backlog of amazing music he had unreleased. So it isn't surprising he wanted to release a large album. So he dumped the 4 albums on Warner Brothers, who apparently didn't want them, supposedly, and went to Mercury, I think was the record company he went to get another deal to release Leather. That was the 1996 official release of it. I'll do that in a minute. And they actually made, I think, like test pressings of it, like 300 copies or something. So there are 300 copies of the original version of Leather, which was a 4 record set, which consisted of the 4 albums he dumped on Warner Brothers. Whether that was the original 10 record set he wanted to release before then isn't clear. Obviously he hadn't done the New York concerts at that point, so there's a bit of confusion about whether he originally intended the 4 albums separately, whether he intended it to be this glorious piece here. Warner Brothers subsequently threatened Mercury with legal action because material on here was also on the Zappa In New York album, which they suddenly did want to release. Apparently they didn't want it, and then they did want it because they told Zappa, allegedly, that it was okay to play this on the radio. So this was never released, but Warner Brothers did slowly release the 4 albums that they had dumped on, and didn't pay him. Apparently they didn't pay him for them. Eventually I think he got the money out of them, but it's pretty shocking, and it is an interesting thing that the attitudes of record companies at that time towards their sort of long-standing artists who had a consistently selling back catalogue. I mean, he made the point of that, the initial sales shouldn't matter that much because the back catalogue sells all the time. The mentality of record company executives at the time seems to be about control, in that they couldn't control an artist like Zappa. He wanted to do all these different projects, and they didn't want him to do that. They just wanted him to give an album, and they wanted to market it how they wanted to market it. And maybe because people in record companies are, in short-term positions and then they move on, they want to think in very short-term. I mean, it's a bit like with TV. I mean, a lot of TV shows have been cancelled, which were potentially big cult shows that could have ended up being like Star Trek. Even Star Trek itself was cancelled. And it's like TV executives don't like anything with a sort of longevity, anything they can't keep control of, anything they can't control the marketing of, which is very strange. It seems a strange mentality, and the record industry is like that, but worse, really, I think. And obviously, this is towards the end of the 70s when things were changing dramatically. The record companies and the journalists were playing along in taking control and making things more marketable and packaged, etc., etc. Given that you'd think these 4 albums that he dumped on them wouldn't necessarily be of the highest standard, but as I said, they are utterly fantastic. The material on this album is fantastic. This is the 1996 version, so it's not the original cover. The original cover is more like the cover of Joe's Garage, but it's worth getting the Ryko 1996 version, not the 2012 version, because this has bonus tracks But we're not reviewing that today. We are reviewing Zappa In New York, which makes up some of the tracks on leather. This was the first release after Zappa had left, which they didn't pay him for until later. Rearranged into a concert, it works tremendously well, partially because there's bonus tracks on the CD version, adding a fair amount of the stuff which wasn't on the original version. Obviously, when he originally released it, it was more to do with the new songs, but there's some classic stuff on there as well, making it into a concert. Not everything's included on there that were played at those concerts. Peaches isn't on there, most noticeably. A couple of other things as well, like Montana, and Dynamo was played, but who cares about that. Probably the most notable missing thing though is Black Napkins, which was obviously played at the concerts, as it was played at many concerts. But obviously it wasn't included on this because it was just on Zoota Laws. So in a way, you could cut off the 20-minute version of Black Napkins on there, add it to this, and you have the ultimate Zappa live album. It is very much the sequel to Roxy, and it is very much its equal, and yet interestingly different in performance. Whereas Roxy has an intensity to it, heavy riffing of these syncopated fast pieces which are played at high intensity. You can feel the paint peeling off the walls with the intensity of the band. This doesn't sound like this. This is more orchestral, probably more nuanced and subtle. It's probably more complex music, a lot of it, but I think it's sight-read by some of the band, and that makes a difference to the performance, I think. So it sounds more orchestral. Roxy is more, you could say it's more unique because it's more intense and more like a rock band. This is more like an orchestra, but it is fantastic. It features a bigger band. He expanded the band with a 5-piece horn section and the introduction of Ray White, who we'll definitely talk about later, I'd imagine, and the return of Ruth Underwood as well. The album starts with Titties and Beer. This didn't open the shows. I think it was actually played towards the end of the shows, but it is a great piece, and it's really strange how he went from this dour, dark, seedy sound of Zoota Laws to, it's like he was funny again. I can't explain why that is, but it's just so much fun. Really funny story about Zappa meeting the devil and tricking him and then into not wanting his soul after all, because he keeps going on about Titties and Beer. Terry Bozzio with a silly rubber hat on, which you can see in the Baby Snakes film, being the devil, and it's just so entertaining. It's brilliant. Originally called Chrissy Pukes Twice, which you can hear on the Philly 76. So this is one of the few songs which were played just a couple of months before. I think that's partially to do with the fact they had the female vocalist Bianca Odin, who played the part of the Chrissy character. So the whole section of that was cut out and it was changed a bit to Titties and Beer. But it is essentially the same piece. Track 2 is Cruisin For Burgers. This wasn't on the original album because it had been released before, obviously. It's not Cruisin For Burgers the song, it's Cruisin For Burgers the theme, used as a guitar solo, in much the same way they did with Willie the Pimp on Fillmore East. Notably, the guitar playing is fantastic. I mean, I did complain about some of the guitar playing on some of these albums. Some of it's sublime, some of it gets a bit messy. It's all brilliant on this album. However, overdubs. The next song I know as Leather. On this song, it's the title track of Leather. Here, it's not called that. It's called I Promise Not to Come in Your Mouth. I'd rather not really upload myself saying that on the internet. Is that a good idea? But yeah, it's actually not a silly song at all. It's actually a complex, subtle, soft horn arrangement of a complex piece of music. That's the first song on the album. It really shows off the band he's just got together and how things have just taken a step up in such a short space of time, just a couple of months. Track 4 is Punky's Whips. Now this was the controversial song. One of the problems that Warner Brothers had with Zappa at the time was this particular song, because it made reference to Punky Meadows, who was this guitar player in this unknown band who were big in Japan called Angel, and apparently it was Herb Cohen, who was Zappa's manager, actually took it off the album. So Warner's decided to release it without that song, which was reason for Zappa to leave Warner Brothers, but also leave his manager as well, which ended up in yet more litigation. So the song details the story of Terry Bozzio's strange obsession with this character. He found a picture of him in a magazine, this guitar player, and basically he looked like a woman, so he decided he fancied it and walked around with this picture, became obsessed with it. It's a bizarre story, and it's perfect Zappa fodder. So he writes this long, structured piece. There's a lot of music in there, a lot of it very complicated. There's a lot of different styles telling this story. Some of it's very funny, some of it's just amazing instrumental playing and writing. Not quite on the scale of Gregory Peccary, but it's getting there. The next song, Honey, Don't You Want a Man Like Me? Completely in the opposite direction, very simple vamp. Is it a vamp? I don't know. A little funky jam. It's a story about an unpleasant interaction with a couple. They go home together, and then the woman won't perform for the man, so he goes off, but then he goes back to ask for his car because he's lost his car keys or something, and she gives him a blowjob. The end of the story. Yeah, so it's a funny little thing, but it works fantastically in the context of the structure of this album as well as Leather. The Illinois Enema Bandit is a true story that he saw in the paper about someone in Illinois forced women to take a severe internal rinse at gunpoint. So that's quite funny. This is a blues piece, so it's a blues jam some great soloing, great riffing, great piece, and it's quite long, 12 minutes 41. On the second disc, we've got I'm the Slime. This is another piece that was not on the original album, probably because it was already released on a recent album. I much prefer live versions of this, particularly this one. This is an excellent one from the version on Overnight Sensation, which I said I don't like the production, but also the vocal style on the album is that sort of creepy whispering style he does. I'd rather the vocals are just said clearly and gives it a bit more energy. Then we've got Panther Brand, also not on the original album because obviously it was already released. Familiar theme, what can I say about Panther Brand? It goes right way back, that one does. And he went way forward as well. He continued to play it. Played it for most of his career, pretty much all his whole career. Manx Need Women, I've no idea what that means. It's a very short instrumental piece, another horn arrangement of swoops and little crescendos, and it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really do a lot. It's similar in style to Naval Aviation in Art, but this is nothing compared to that piece. That segues almost straight away into the Black Page drum solo, as it's known, or the Black Page number 1. At one point, some of the musicians in the band, I can't remember who it was, possibly Terry Bozzio and Eddie Jobson, saying that they feared the Black Page when Zappa gives them a sheet of music to read, and it's just black, it's just full of notes. So Zappa wrote a piece, and it is astonishingly difficult to play, and it is one of my favourite Zappa pieces. This t-shirt, that's a section of the keyboard part to the Black Page. It's very famous, partially because Steve Vai, later down the line, transcribed it, got himself the job in the band. More on that later. It presents an interesting question about music, and I like the way it eliminates the sort of illusion of this sort of romantic notion of music writing as to come from inside your soul, the magic. Robert Plant fell asleep and woke up, and there the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven were written, which is rubbish. It's a writing music is like anything. It's a skill. It's a process you go through, and obviously going through that process, you express yourself, and when you perform it, you express yourself. But it's not like this. You have to sit there and feel the emotions to write the notes. Is silly, and this really shows that because it is a wonderful piece of music. Interesting drum solo, but the notes he wrote over the top of it in the second half are just brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. I can't tell you why. It's very recognisable Zappa. And then we go straight into Big Leg Emma. At this point, this had never been released because it was on. I'm just going to have to check this. It was on Absolutely Free. Yep, it is on Absolutely Free, the CD version, but was not on the original album. And so people thought it was a new song. It is a fantastic performance of a great, fun song. The horns really give it some welly. It's just great, and it's all about juxtaposition. So that and the Black Page works so fantastically well. That's what Zappa's all about. He's about as much about Big Leg Emma as he is about the Black Page, as he is about all those other things. Then we have Sofa, also not on the album because it was on One Size Fits All. It's just a great melody, really. It's similar to Strictly Gentile in a way, and it's big pronounced notes of and it's I love the feel of it. It's not too serious. It's grand and great. Then we got the Black Page number 2, which is the rearrangement of the Black Page to make it a bit more listenable, apparently, and he's also excellent. We get the little rap at the start where Zappa explains the history of the song. Then we have The Torture Never Stops. It's the only song he included from the previous album, and it's understandable why. I think far and away better live than the Horrible album version, I think. And finally, we have the Purple Lagoon and Approximate. Now, Approximate was a piece by the Roxy band, which wasn't included on Roxy for whatever reason, but Purple Lagoon had been played by this band a couple of months before, which is on Philly 76. And what he's done is he's juxtaposed the two almost over the top of each other, and they sort of fit together. And then it goes off into various solos by various band members to sort of close the concert off, if you like. I don't think they really ended on that, but it works fantastically well. An absolute gem. Once again, another one. See you next time.